that I came to the New York area, and it is just so strange. I haven't been to the city, but even in this area where I live in northern Westchester, it's just strange, that people are not, you don't see people out and about in the shops, and everybody kind of looks at you sideways if you're not wearing a mask. Almost everyone I've seen has been wearing them. Some people with gloves, in fact, like at the supermarket and stuff like that. But it's been sad, it's just such that
it's like an episode of The Twilight Zone where there's no one.
Yeah, it's very, very odd. But
or Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
yes.
Totally valid. Are you on?
That's another one. Yep. So let's get started and everything. And again, we thank you all for coming. If you have any questions for Esmeralda as we go along, please put your questions in the chat or your name in the chat, and I will call upon you. So we will call upon you. That way we can have, we can be orderly. But we do want it to be interactive. So yes, please have lots of questions. Put your name in the chat and we'll call upon you, okay? So without further ado, I give you Esmeralda Santiago.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really thrilled to have an opportunity to visit with Comadres and Compadres through the sponsorship of Las Comadres de las Americas and Las Comadres Connect, which is such a great idea. I was able to, when I was in Maine, I was able to participate in Dalma's talk, and it was lovely. And I know you're doing a lot of different things to keep the Comadres and Compadres engaged and to have a moment beyond what's happening. So I have to thank you all for doing that. And I'm just glad to be a part of it in this evening. I know, Maria, you had, when we talked about it, you said, a lot of our comadres are really interested in writing. And maybe there's maybe what I could focus on is, how do you start, because having an idea, everybody gets ideas. And a lot of them, they're great ideas, but then what do we do with them? And I think that that's the big challenge when you think you have a great idea that you ought to write down, you think, and then you kind of don't know what to do with it. So what I do is 88 cents at Walmart. I have these. I have one in my car. I have one by my bedside. I have them, of course, in my office where I write. If I'm traveling outside of the area, I have something smaller. So always have something to write on. If you want to be a writer, you have to be able to write anywhere at any time on anything. And you can't get too precious about it. A lot of people are like, oh my God, I need to get the $15 moleskins or, no, you just get any kind of paper. I remember one of the first essays that was published from me, I wrote on, I was at a Japanese restaurant having lunch by myself and had this idea, and I did not have anything to write with. So I opened, the little envelope that the chopsticks come in. So I kind of opened it and flattened it out and wrote it in very tiny script, about 300 words for this essay that eventually ended up being published in the Christian Science Monitor. So don't get into those situations, where you're like desperate to get your idea down and you don't have anything to do it. A lot of people always have their phones. You can either voice memo it if you'd like to do it quickly, or you can write it on your notes, or you can open a text edit or whatever your phone allows. But being able to write it down immediately is so important, because it doesn't matter how old you are, how experienced you are, how many years you've done this. ideas and these concepts, they're fleeting, you know, and then they're gone, and then you can't get them back. So make sure you don't lose them. That doesn't mean that everything you write is going to be great. A lot of the time it's really, you know, like I look at some of my, a lot of my notes and I'm like, what does that mean? I mean, it'll be something very cryptic. And I'm like, what was I thinking? Especially if it's like when I wake up in the middle of the night or something and I'll write something and I'm like, what the heck was that? But it always triggers something. And so that's really important. Just make sure that you keep track of these ideas that you have, so that when you do have the techniques for actually sitting down to writing, you haven't lost them and you can't say, oh, I don't know what to write about. You have a lot of stuff to write about. So that's one of the first things that I would recommend, is just to keep track of your ideas and take it seriously. It's not, you know, yes, some of them are going to be cryptic and they're going to be, I mean, if I read you some of my notes from these things that are so, oh, look, something about Las Comadres. When I was writing an essay for Las Comadres, I do these bubble things when I'm trying to come up with an idea. And so just make sure you keep track of it and that you respect it as part of your process as a writer. Because if you don't respect your process as a writer, you can't expect anybody else to respect it, including your family particularly. So take it seriously and value it and respect it as something that is part of you and that you shouldn't need to apologize for. I have a dear friend who's a poet, and so she has these little notebooks that are always in her purse, and we will be having lunch somewhere, and now I've known her for 30 years or something, and I know, like, there will be a moment where she'll just go like this, go into her purse, get out her little notebook and write something, you know, and then put it back, and then we'll keep going. I mean, I don't have to ask her it doesn't matter. This is her thing and this is her process, and so we respect it. So respect it for yourself. And that's the first thing. And then the other thing is, you don't need the expensive stuff. You know, you can start with these notebooks. I love great stationery. I love writing books. I love fountain pens, and so I get a lot of them for Christmas and birthdays. And as far as I'm concerned, I can never have enough of them, right? So I love it when I get it. But you don't need it. You know, you just need a pencil and piece of paper, a napkin. I have written entire essays on napkins in restaurants when I didn't have, in the days when I didn't value it, or I didn't think that I needed it. So that's the first thing. Then the other thing is, you know, if you want to be a writer, what is the first thing you are before you're a writer? Is you're a reader. So if you're not a reader, you have no idea of what it is to be a writer. And you also have no business being a writer if you're not a reader, because you're not going to be a good writer if you don't write a lot, if you don't read a lot. And the more you read, the more you learn. Not only do you learn you know, vocabulary and grammatical rules, how to use them and how not to use them, or how to bend them, all those kinds of things. You learn them just from reading, and it's almost something that you don't need to pay attention to. You just become aware. It becomes part of your process. But also because you need to know where your writing fits with the kinds of things, you know, what you think you want to do and what kind of things you're reading. Most of us will write the kind of thing that we like to read, right? So it's not a surprise to you that, for me, you know, my big novel takes place in the 19th century, because most of my fiction, that's where it lives. That's what I love to read, is 19th century novels. And so it's not surprising that when I wanted to write a big, you know, many-paged novel, I took the 19th century as kind of the canvas for me, in addition to other reasons, which we can talk about later. But it, you know, and if you're a person who reads mostly Stephen King, who's a wonderful writer, and you like that horror or that thriller kind of thing, then you probably will write those kinds of work. So you want to know who are the masters and mistresses in the genre that you love to read, because you will very likely write something like it. If you love romance novels, read a lot of romance novels. I mean, be a scholar of your genre. Science fiction, I'm not a very big science fiction reader, and I'm not a thriller, a horror thing, because I am cobarde. This is like, I get so scared about horror thing. I don't like horror movies, all that stuff, really. So I don't partake in it, not because I don't think that it's not good writing. Some of these writers are amazing. For me, it's too scary, and my emotional life is important to me. So I don't read that. But if you love horror, if you like sci-fi, if you like historical novels, then that's what you could spend your time in, because that's what you will give you an opportunity to learn more about, not only about your genre, but about the kinds of, how you envision your characters. It enriches everything. And
Esmeralda, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Let me interrupt you. One is if you could explain the bubbles you use in your ideas.
Okay, so this is something that they teach it, I think, in like 4th grade or something. I remember I came across it many, many years ago. And basically, if let's say that I have let's say I have an assignment to write about Christmas, right? So I would just make a bubble, a circle, and I would put Christmas in it. And then from it, anything that comes, any idea related to it, I just make a little line and another bubble, and I'll put lechon, and then I'll put Puerto Rico, or I put snow, or I put Christmas carols, or I remember my dad, or everything that goes around this circle. And then some of these little circles are connected to each other sometimes. So then if I have the circle Christmas, and then I put Puerto Rico, and then I connect lechon to Puerto Rico, because obviously. That's how I kind of look for connections and ideas, and what the theme is, how it's connected. And they're really just a way, it's just a brainstorming, it's just a tool. I also do it with cards. I have these little 3x5 cards. And so sometimes I'll do it that way. I'm a great believer that it's best to do this kind of thing by hand, with handwriting, because there's a whole different connection to do it with your hand and a piece of paper or a card than doing it on the computer. I have apps that do this. I just don't find it as useful or as helpful or as freeing as it is when I do it by hand. So you just keep putting as many bubbles as you can. Sometimes, and this one it happened very quickly. If I could find another one, I could show you. They can get very, very complex, but it's a way to free your imagination, and like in this one, for example, I don't know, see how many connections there are. So it's just for me, it really helps. And then I have no excuse that I don't have any ideas. Obviously, there's a lot of ideas there. So then the issue is which one of these ideas are good. And that's when that's where craft comes in.
So another question is, were you an avid reader as a child, and what got you started writing?
Okay. Well, as a child, we didn't have books, and we were very poor. So what I read was the newspapers that my dad would bring. My dad was a carpintero, a jornalero. And so sometimes, when he would go to the city or to town from the place that we lived, and so he would always bring the newspapers because he wanted to read it. And as soon as I learned how to read, that was my reading, was the newspapers. And I don't know if any of you who grew up in Puerto Rico around that time, it was like reading the National Enquirer or something. There were tabloids about murders and terrible things, you know, and like the politics situation, and they're very sensationalistic. But the good thing about those newspapers is that they had a very simple language. So I was a kid, you know, so it allowed me to learn how to read very quickly. I remember when I was in 7th grade, my family moved to Carolina, to Parcelas Falú, and the school that I went to had a school library, which I had never had in any of the schools that I had been to up till then. And when I discovered that library, that was the magic time for me, when I could realize that I could borrow books, bring them home, read them, turn them back, bring a whole bunch more. And then when I came to New York, even more expansive and many more possibilities, because the libraries were much bigger. I mean, the one in that school was just really like a small room, and it was pretty much the books for the appropriate for that age, you know, for junior high school kids. I remember the first book that I took out from that little library was the Aesop's Fables. It's the first book that I ever read from a library, because I had never, you know, we just didn't have them. And then my dad realized that I was really interested in reading, and so much to my mother's dismay, sometimes if people couldn't pay him for the work, and he noticed that they had like a lot of magazines or books in the house, he would say, oh, well, you know, instead of paying me, can I have to, you know, this or that, a few books. And one year I remember he came with a whole encyclopedia that that was the one that broke them up. That was the end of their relationship, that instead of bringing money to feed his 7 children, he brought an encyclopedia and said, oh, well, but you know, they couldn't pay, this is worth a lot of money, blah, blah. She just wouldn't have it. But for me, it was like, oh, I mean, I really literally started with A, you know, I was just reading. And it was my beginning of interest with trivia too. I mean, I just know a lot of stuff that I shouldn't know. It's because I read the encyclopedia. Mm-hmm. So that's how the reading evolved. And I've always, you know, I can't be anywhere without reading matter. Once I started using my iPhone, I didn't have to carry books around everywhere, which I used to do. So I read on my phone, and I'm very comfortable doing that. And I can carry, you know, the entire works of Dickens if I want to in my little phone, which is just awesome. When did I start to write? I think I was a screenwriter. I was a producer and filmmaker, and I was writing a lot of scripts for the company that my husband and I still own. And I would write the scripts for our company. I also had been, at the same time, because we were freelancers and didn't make a lot of money, I was a proposal writer. This is in Boston. And one of my clients said, you know, you would write these proposals, and then sometimes they would invite you to defend the proposal in front of the people who are going to give the money, right? So the person who hired me said, Esmeralda, you know, everyone at the meeting, which I was not able to attend, says everyone was like amazed at this proposal that you wrote, because it read like a novel. They were all so engaged by the writing. We got the money, you know? So he thought, because I'd done such a good job writing the story of this organization, the work that they were doing with children, and you know, a youth unit in South, I think it was not the South, yeah, it was the South End, I guess, and Jamaica Plain and that area. And so they were, so I was passionate about the needs for this community. So it helped, and it was easy for me to then be passionate writing about them. And that's another part of being a writer is, you know, you write your passions. You don't write the stuff that you don't care about. You write about the things that you care about, the things that are your preoccupations, the things that worry you, the things that keep you up at night, the things that you remember, the things, the people that you love. And so it's always, you know, the best writing comes from passion. And so for many years, I was writing my passion using documentary film scripts and proposals until I was 33 or something like that, and I had a child, my first child, and I was living in south of Boston in a suburban community in which I was sure I was the only Puerto Riqueña for miles, you know, and I was feeling very kind of isolated there. But one morning I just had this sense that I had this little baby, newborn, and he would grow up in this community where I was like the only one like me. I said, how is he ever going to have any sense about his mother? And so that's when I began to write my essays that I then, that I began to explore my history and my memories. And a friend saw one of them and she said, oh, you know, you should get these published. And so it just hadn't occurred. I mean, I did it for him. Again, it was out of passion. But once I began to publish them, I realized, oh, okay, this is so much more fun than being in a film set. And that's how it evolved into my saying to my husband after some years, I am not going to be a filmmaker anymore. I really want to focus on writing books. And that's what I did. And it's, you know, here I am.
So Sonia wants to know, what are some of the literary and cultural influences that informed your craft of writing?
I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, reading the story, you know, these classical stories, Aesop, you know, fables. I read a lot of fairy tales because I used to tell them to my sisters and brothers. We have the generation that I grew up was still very much in the oral history tradition of people actually telling stories at night. We're all sit together and whatever. And so I used to read a lot of fairy tales. And I read, and then I discovered at the library the myths, Edith Hamilton's mythology. So I read that cover to cover, and then I would tell my sisters and brothers those stories. And so I really had a self-education in the classics, and then little by little, as I learned more English and my schools changed, then I began to learn more about, you know, Shakespeare and Dickens and the classical writers. And I think that those are my influences. That's where it started. It's this sense of story. I'm very kind of plot oriented, part of it because it comes from being a filmmaker, but also because that's what these fables and these stories are. They're very quick plots that get you from point A to point Z. And I still love that. You know, I listen to and read the Iliad and the Odyssey at least once a year. I alternate them. I listen and read any of the classical writers that I love. I'm a great lover of big fat books. So I used to go through a bookstore or library and get the biggest one that I could get because I just didn't want it to end. You know, I just love the reading experience. So I read a lot of that material and still do. And so those are the things that I think have informed my writing, is this, I guess, sort of classical training that if I had a different kind of life and if I had gone to a private school, I would have probably learned them in school, but I had to learn it on my own. And I think it helped me.
Mm-hmm. So we have a couple of writers in the audience.
Awesome.
So Amina wants to know, she writes great beginnings, but then she gets stuck. So plotting for her is a challenge. She's more of a stream of consciousness writer. And so what do you recommend outlining a story first?
I outline everything first. I do not write chapters or scenes until I have my plot, because I like to know where I'm going. Now it doesn't mean that I won't have tangents, pages and pages that I will eventually delete, or that that my characters don't surprise me. They do constantly, but I really do believe in outlining. And if you're a stream of consciousness writer and you're stuck, then just work out of the box, become an outliner, try to outline something, do the opposite of what you usually do that actually makes you stuck. And so I will do that. I outline everything. Even with my outlines, I will get stuck sometimes. And so then what I do is something that a good friend of mine, also another poet, he used to call it impromptu. And basically he said, you'd set a timer for 10 minutes and you put your pen to your page and you write for 10 minutes without lifting the pen or trying to change it or trying to correct. And it doesn't matter what you're writing. It can be the stupidest thing that you've ever imagined, but the object is that for 10 minutes, you don't think, you just write, you just allow it. And so even with all I have at another time when I see you or you see me, you will see that whole wall, we have what I call my wall, where I keep all my, cards and like a dream board. So I keep that also as a reference for my outlines. But I do get to that point sometimes where even with the outline, I don't know, I know who the character is, how old they are, where they're going, but I don't know how to get them there. And that happens, and so you can get really frustrated, or you can say, okay, I have to find another way to make this happen. And so because I'm a very kind of organized, structuring kind of person, I do the opposite, which is just write for 10 minutes and don't worry about what happens. And then those bubbles that I showed you are like incredibly helpful for me. That's something that I really respect in my process, is that if I start doing those bubbles and it just really frees me. And so you look for ways to doing things in a different way from the way that's keeping you stuck. And that usually.
So is that how you deal, another writer, Karen, so she wants to know how you deal with writer's block, because right now she is on a deadline and she's struggling, with writer's block, and the closer the deadline gets, the worse her writer's block becomes.
Right. Well, this is, again, I think trying to not worry about writing really helps. I get into those kinds of funks myself. I have a deadline now, September 1st, for something I need to do that is really important. It's only 800 words. That is not a lot of writing, right? You could really put that together in somebody could do it in an hour, right? Somebody else could do it. I am already freaking out over this deadline of September 1st of 800 words, because I have to say a lot in those 800 words. And so, what I do is what I just showed you. I will do my bubbles. If that didn't work, I'll get a bunch of little cards and I'll write ideas and just throw them down. Just one idea card, each card with a little idea, and I'll put them down for 10 minutes, just very quickly, just not so that I'm not criticizing myself as I'm doing it. And I don't judge it. If the idea is stupid, it's stupid. It doesn't need to end up in the text. If it's there, it's there. And so I try to do that. And the whole idea for me is to just try and free that internal critic, which that is what is usually keeping us blocked. It's us. just blocking ourselves. And so I try to not criticize myself and to not judge myself. And the only way to do it is to not think as I'm going through this process. And it works, you know. It's very painful. Was it Karen? I feel for you. I feel for you deeply. But, you know, just remember that it's there. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to write it, you know, it's there. These kinds of blocks are usually emotional more than anything. It's usually based on fear and these voices that we hear in our brains that don't belong to us, belong to people outside them. And I think to not panic is really important, you know, because if you panic, the more you panic, the more you block. So trying to not, I remember seeing, you might have seen this actually, Isabel Allende, I think it was in a TED lecture or something like that, where she's talking about her process. And she says that she sits down to write the worst first draft that has ever been written. Like, I'm really like, really? Well, what she means is she is not judging that first draft. The first draft, nobody's gonna see that. The only person who's gonna see that is you as the writer. The first draft is really for you so that you know what your ideas are. What are your themes? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Who are your characters? So that first draft, for you to critique it or in any way judge it, is so counterproductive to the process. So try to do that. Try to not judge, to sit down to write the worst first draft that you can imagine. Because at the end of that process, you will have a first draft. It's probably terrible, but it'll be there. And the most fun of writing is actually rewriting. You know, writing is really painful and difficult and hard and emotional and frustrating, but rewriting is, you know, every writer will tell you that. It's the most fun part. Once you've written it, oh my God, rewriting is the best.
So we have two comadres that are writing memoirs. And so they want to know, you know, you can't tell like your whole story. So how do you know which parts to pick? And how do you approach the emotional turbulence when writing?
I cry a lot. I throw things. I eat chips. I mean, I do things, you know, that I shouldn't be doing because I'm emotional and I need to have an outlet. So for writing memoir, the thing about writing memoir is that you don't know, with any book, but I think particularly with memoir, you do not know what your book is about until you have written at least 300 pages. You know, people think, oh, I wrote the first 20 pages and they're beautiful. I'm going like, you know, you might throw that beautiful chapter out once you've written page 327. You just do not know what you have until you've written many, 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 many pages. Particularly with memoir, I find that's important, is to have the freedom to write whatever we want to write in whatever language or method or grammar we do. You know, like my writing is in English and in Spanish. I do a lot of writing by hand because it's soothing for me, and I try not to judge it, and just you try to write as fast as you could, as much as you can write without judging it or critiquing it until you have a first draft. Because you don't know what your book is about. You just don't. And people don't believe it until they've done it. And I have done it 6 or 7 times now, and I can tell you, this is the reality. And so if you give up after page 100 or 150, then, you know, you run out of steam. Right now, I mean, today I printed, because I do my paper edits every few months. I'll just visit everything that I've written. So I have 165 pages of Courier 12 point, on a page. And the reason I decided to do this is because the last few days, I have an outline, I do my little bubbles, I have my cards all over the place, but I just had this major disruption in my life while I had this move, and I got out of my rhythm, my writing rhythm. I was writing, and all of a sudden I'm disrupted in my rhythm. And so even though I've got all these tools and I know where I'm going and everything, I'm stuck. So what do? I reread my work. And by rereading my work, I begin to pick up threads and things that can go after page 165, that I can make notes about. And so that's enough. And again, that process is not to correct it. You're not correcting anything. I can't correct it. I don't have a first draft yet finished. What I'm doing is following the threads of what I've already written. If you have 100 pages, a traditional novel would be about 300 pages, right? So you're a third of the way through. So a lot of things are beginning to emerge. So when you reread it without trying to perfect it, just read it and take notes, it really begins to open up what you need to do next. And that's what I'm going to be doing the next couple of days. So.
Okay, so Compadre Paul wants to know, what is your process for creating complex characters, and how concerned are you about your characters being multidimensional versus a less is more approach? Is your bigger goal that the characters simply add to the overachieving storyline?
Well, again, I plot. So once I plot, once I have my outline, which is plot, so that's what the outline is. It's not, just basically this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens in the middle, this happens, this is how it ends. I have to tell you that sometimes I get to the end and the end is not the one that I originally wrote in my outline, because the characters have evolved and the characters have told me different things in the process. And sometimes they just don't want to die at the end, or they don't want to get married, or they don't want to go on a trip, or they don't want to do whatever it is that I told them they were going to do. So that's why I think maintaining that openness until the very end is important. So I try to, I'm not a very good artist. I actually do portraits of my characters. What do they look like? Even in, I'm really maybe 2 steps above stick figures, but it'll be the kind of thing like, do they have a round face or do they have a long face? Do they have big eyes or little eyes? They have, I draw them. I look a lot about what they look like. I try to envision them. What do they look like? Are they tall, short? Are they wide or are they narrow? Do they have any features that make them different from other people? Like in Conquistadora, Conciencia la Joroba. She appeared out of no, I did not put her in my outline, I have to tell you. But one day there she was with her hump, and so I had to include her. I had to figure out a way to include her. So I try to imagine them as people, as real people, not as characters. To me, these people are completely they're all my family. They're my ancestors that I never met, and so I try to envision them in their entire humanity, their flaws as well as their virtues. And once I do that, it begins to round them out more than just, racing through it. As I'd mentioned before, I long for thick, fat books that keep me engaged for a long time. So I'm not going to be writing these books where all we say is, oh, she has bangs and wears saddle shoes, and then that's the last description. You're gonna get a complete picture of this person because I need that as a reader. I constantly look for that in my writing, and if it doesn't appear in the books that I'm reading, I stop reading and pick up another book, because I'm not 20 years old anymore, and life is short and there are many books. So I look for very, very good detail in characters. I look to know what they look like, how they sound, how they move, and how they age, because, you know, all those kinds of things are important to me. I know that right now, you know, this kind of modern way of a lot of the fiction is that you don't take time with details and those kinds of things. And I'm going, well, my readers want that because my readers read like me because I'm the first reader of my work. So I'm writing stuff like the kind of stuff I want to read. And that's why I do it. And I won't read the stuff that doesn't engage me that way. I need to know that these people are real. They're not just a picture that then, you know, that doesn't have any life. So I hope that answered his question.
So we have some questions about publication. So Sonia wants to know, what are some writing mediums that you recommend for emerging writers to pursue for potential publication?
Well, I depending on what they're trying to do, I read every day. I get these, there's a place called Narratively, which is all memoir-based, shorter pieces, but they all have to be memoir. There's Catapult, there's The Rumpus, there's Medium. Those are the kind of the 4 ones that I read at every single day. I get their newsletters every morning, or Narratively comes out every once a week on Mondays. And then I will choose from what they send. I will scan it. If it's something I'm interested in, I'll read it. If it's something that I'm not really that interested in, I just put it away, imagining that if I want it later, I can always go back to it. So those 4 are great for, I think, for people who are writing shorter kinds of pieces, and most of them are kind of medium or nonfiction based. There's, of course, you know, if you really, I love the New York Times Modern Love column. It's just so wonderful because it started out with just being about people dating and really about, you know, love and sex. And it has really evolved into something about, I think, grander, and still under 1,200 words, and usually very well written. And whoever the editors are really pay very good attention to the writing. So I would, if you want to write short nonfiction pieces, those would be really good places to look at and to read. For fiction, I don't really read a lot of, I read books, you know, so like, I don't really know of too many places that you would be submitting. I think Catapult has fiction, actually, because, yeah, I think Catapult has short stories, but there's like so many online of, you know, where you send your material in and you might get published, but you have to look for them. And it's up to you, really. There's just so many. I don't do that because I don't publish that. I don't write short pieces anymore. So I can't give you a very specific, except for those, the ones that I read it. I read Granta, of course, also, but that's a very, fancy people writing in there. And then, so you look for the ones that you like to read. Because if you're going to be sending your material to them, you have to know what their audience is. And I think it's a lot of research. I'm sorry that I can't be more specific other than those memoir ones that I mentioned.
So Comadre Karen wanted you to know that Modern Love is now a TV show.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. And it's based on those stories.
Is it? Oh, that's so funny.
So we have Sarita from Mil Mundos Bookstore in Bushwick. And she wants to know which recent book has brought you comfort during this pandemic.
The book that I'm writing right now. I mean, it's not published or anything, but for me, during this whole pandemic, what has made it easier for me to function is the fact that I'm writing, you know, and that I'm really taking it very seriously and doing the best that I can to put another book out there as soon as possible. I have not had a book out since 2011, but there are 3 of my drafts out there in the world that are not published yet. So that has been the most comforting for me. I read a lot, you know. I've been reading just, you know, a lot of people recommend things. I always, whenever I get frustrated with some books that people recommend that I just don't like, I always go back to the 19th century novels that I really, there's always a new one that I haven't read before. And I find that comforting. And then lastly, poetry. That is, for me, that's very comforting. I try to read a poem every morning before I start working. I'm very organized about my writing. And so I go up to my office and, you know, my space, and I read a poem before I start writing, because it helps me. I mean, I think poets probably work their work more than any other writer. They're dealing not just with sentences and words, they're dealing with syllables. I mean, they are just so precise. And so I find that very inspiring when I'm writing these very messy first draft. It's wonderful to read a poem that has just been worked so much to the point where it's like as perfect as the poet could make it. And so I will do that. I went last year, last year or the year before, I read all of Julia's books, poems from the beginning to the end, from that big Jack Agüero's anthology. And
this is Julia Alvarez?
No, not Julia Alvarez. De Burgos, la puertorriqueña.
Julia Burgos?
De Burgos. I had that book for many years, and I had never really, I just kind of had scattered here and there. And then I decided last year, I'm gonna read every single one of her poems. So every day I would read one of them. And it's just, you know, they're not all great, but in every one of them, there's like at least 1 or 2 amazing lines that are inspiring and motivating. And so it's always, I find that really helpful in my life. And poetry always kind of gets me going too. So that's another thing that I've been doing a lot of. And then again, I read these online stories. I love reading memoirs. And so these short pieces in Narratively and Catapult and The Rumpus and Medium are a short way for me to just have like 20 minutes or a half hour. I'm online, or I'm doing something, or I'm having lunch by myself. And so it's part of learning about writing. You know, I mean, as a writer, you're always reading to learn how to get to be a better writer. And so you become a different kind of reader. And so for me, reading is part of my work. But most of the time, when it's really good writing, I don't think of this as work. It's just pleasure, you know? And that's what I look for in any book. I'm reading right now, I wish I could, I'm not in my office and I can't remember this. I'm reading this story, this novel written by a Turkish writer that is just so hard to read. It's hard to read because it's so emotional and it's so intense that I can only read like maybe 6 to 10 pages at a time. It's called Every Fire You Tend. Every Fire You Tend. I think her first name is Selma, and she's got a name that I can't quite remember. I'm getting old, I forget these things. So I'm reading that right now, and it's just like, it's a book like nothing that I would ever try to do myself. It's written in the second person. Usually when I start reading something and they start in the second person, I am like immediately turned off because I don't feel like I'm connecting to the characters as much. It's very, very hard to do that well. And very few people have done it well. And I just don't want to waste my time with that. But in this book, I'm learning so much about how it can be done well. And so those kinds of things are even though it's hard, it's emotionally difficult to read. It's soothing in the sense that, oh, there's like wonderful writing out there. There's some people who are trying new things, you know, writing stories that I don't know, that I hadn't even imagined. And to me, their generosity of doing that is, I'm just so grateful that it's available. And so I find that soothing, that it's available and that it's there.
So we wanted to, we have some questions about the unique obstacles that that are facing Latino authors nowadays, you know, with the gatekeepers being white, and, you know, and the stories, you know, our stories being written by white people, you know, and they get the big advances, and, you know, they give us the little advances, or they don't even publish our stories. And so what are some of the obstacles that you have overcome, and do you see that, you know, in your experience, do you see that the obstacles are becoming less or becoming more?
I think it's about the same from when I started, to tell you the truth. It hasn't changed that much. And this is what I will tell you, because I still hear this. This is 2020, and I'm a published author, and I still hear from the gatekeepers that Latinos don't buy books. So if you're not buying our books, they are not going to publish them. You can be, you know, they just won't, you know. And so I think it's really, you know, I have in the next room in my hallway, it's about 10 feet long shelves of Latino books that I have bought, most of which I have not read. Not because they're not wonderful writers or good books. You know, life is short, I have work, and, you know, but I buy them because every time that the 8 cents that the author might get, you know, it goes into a little place in the publishers that, oh, this Latino book was sold, you know. And so this is why, I mean, this is one of the things I really appreciate about Las Comadres and the book club that you run. You know, it's really, really important to support us, to buy our books. And if you can't afford to buy our books, go to the library and borrow them, because that also gets ticked off by the publishers in their marketing departments. You know, how many books are being read. My books are all on Audible. You know, if you'd rather listen to audio, go and get a Latina writer's books. You know, as soon as I hear about Julia Alvarez's book, I went and I bought it. I knew I wasn't going to read it for a while. I had a whole stack of things. I had a very big deadline that I had to meet, but I didn't want too many weeks to pass before I bought it, before publishers and newspapers and reviewers kind of forget that book was out there. So it's so important to support us and to mention us. You know, when I look at a movie, or like all these things, when we see people, we see their back, and I'm always looking like, what books do they read? And I remember saying this to one of the Latino famous actors that I met at an event, you know, and he is also a producer in this show that he was in at the time that we met. And I said, look, you know, you're a big guy in this universe, you know, please have your writers and your producers have your character read a Latino book on camera every once in a while, and have them show books on your walls in your apartments and whatever. You know, we have to call on these people to support us also. I mean, you never see Latinos reading on TV. when was the last time you saw that? You know, we need to do that. And so I you know, it was embarrassing for him. I know he probably never talked to me again, but I had to tell him, because we need to make sure that our authors are being recognized. And I think that that's the first thing that we need to do, is to make sure to change that narrative that Latinos don't buy books. You know, yes, we buy books. We may not have the time to read all of them, but we buy them, you know. And so sometimes it's a sacrifice for me to spend $27, which is what for a hardcover now. It's a lot of money, you know, but that means something, and it means something for my future as a writer when I go to a publisher who says, "Oh, you know, Esmeralda, but Latinos don't buy books." You know, we have to change that. We have to change it, and so that's one of my frustrations, and it is the frustration of all of you who want to be writers, because until that narrative switches, we're going to have trouble getting published. You know, it's a business. For us, it's our lives, it's our passion, it's the thing that we love, it's what we live for. But for them, it's a business. It's a and that's what it comes down to. So, so thank you, Las Comadres, for supporting.
So, Viv, who is our social media guru, she also has, because you suggested to support our authors to buy their books, and Viv is suggesting to all of us that whenever you buy a book, you put it on social media. You know, I bought this book, and tag the author, tag the publisher, you know, put Latinos are reading.
That's one idea.
Do all that. And then Julia reminds us that whenever you read a book, you know, do a little review. It doesn't have to be big. You put it on Amazon, you put it, you know, on Goodreads, wherever it is that you can put it. You know, it could be just a line. "Oh my God, I love this book. You know, she had you know, the heroine wore red lipstick just like mine." I mean, that could just be 2 sentences, but we need those reviews, and we need the social media. So whenever you buy a book, tag yourself, tag the author, tag the publisher, you know, Latinos are buying. Let's start a campaign.
Yeah, that's great. And thank the publishers when if you find a book by a Latina or Latino, Latinx, and you love it, you know, just put it on on your social media, you know, that how courageous for them to publish this book, let's say, things like that encourages them to look for these kinds of books that are, you know, we're writing things that don't exist. You know this, of course, you know this. And so we need to make sure that they know that we're paying attention.
Mm-hmm. So our last question is, well, you've basically given us everything. Is there anything, what was the best advice that you ever got?
As a writer or in life?
Both.
Both, my God. I remember, I was thinking about this yesterday, actually, because I remember when I was 18, I just graduated at high school, and I had my first full-time job. And I was a male girl in a mail room, and this lovely woman whose name was Tony, and she kind of she saw just how innocent and naive I was, and she says, "I just want to tell you, you say yes. Just remember, you can always say no later, but once you say no, it's really hard to get to yes." So I'm thinking like, I'm not really sure what she means. It took me a while to figure out. And I think what she was telling me is to be open, you know, to be open to new experiences, to new people, to being vulnerable, because I can always say no. Of course, there are situations where that doesn't work, and I'm very aware of that. But I think she was speaking about, you know, in the greater scheme of life, to be open and be adventurous, really. So that was, I think, in terms of life, this is something my mother would have never told me. She would have told me the opposite, because she was so frightened about what could happen to our daughters, you know. But I was not Tony's daughter, and she could say that to me, and it helped me. In terms of writing, I mean, I think the thing that I think this message from that I mentioned earlier about Isabel Allende, saying that, you know, the first draft doesn't have to be good. That was so freeing, you know. I mean, the fact that I can write, I mean, I have to tell you, when I was Puerto Rican, was 700 pages in first draft.
Wow.
That is 700 terrible pages, okay? Out of those 700 pages, I ended up with 300 pages. So it just shows how much stuff is not good in your first draft. And it's always like that for me. I write way more than I ever publish. And so that was very freeing to me, to know not to judge my first draft. Nobody else is going to see it, you know? And so if nobody else is going to see it, I'm just doing it for myself so that I can get my own ideas out there, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect until it goes to publication. And even there, I have a lot of writer friends who walk around with their books that they're still editing after they've been published. So it's, you know, just be good to yourself and appreciate the effort and value it and respect it, and know that you will not know what your book is about until you have at least 300 pages or more. That's just the reality. And, you know, good luck with that.
Wonderful. Just before we go, Jahida wants to know, they're having a reading for the Bronx Bound books. They're doing a reading and they would like to invite you to read.
Okay.
So,
you know how to connect them.
Yeah, I will send you Jahida's address and then you guys can talk and everything. All so right. We want to say to thank you very much. Let me just do a gallery view so I can take a picture of all of us with you. Everybody say cheese. Yes, thank you. So thank you, Esmeralda, for being with us. You know, we really appreciate that you were able to spend your evening with us, and we had a wonderful time. Everyone is clapping. I don't know if you can see them. They're all
thank you all for being a part of this.
We all appreciate it. And we want to thank you.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye. Thank you. Happy writing, everyone. Have a good night.
You too. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for your time. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Maria, for putting such a wonderful event together.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Bye,
awesome. Ladies.
Thank you. Thank
Hi,
you,
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Bye. It's great seeing you, all of you.
Appreciate this. It was wonderful, Maria. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Jahida, I'm going to call. Do I have your number?
I'll give it to you right now. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, put it in the chat, and I'll call you, and then I'll give you Esmeralda's phone.
That would be wonderful. 0310 and my email. And anyone who wants to keep my number, that's cool too. I recognize some really cool, beautiful faces on here.
Yes, this was
Hi,
wonderful.
Sonia.
This was wonderful. All right, ladies. Good night.
Thanks.
Happy writing.
Thank you, Maria, again.
Okay, bye.
Bye, bye, everybody.